But because they knew what one open door could change, somewhere in the quiet of memory, the man remained not as a hero, but as proof. Proof that choosing not to look away can become someone's entire world. The house stayed quiet for a long time after he was gone. Not the peaceful quiet he had learned to love, but a heavier kind, the kind that settles into corners and waits. Dust gathered slowly on surfaces he once wiped every morning. The chair by the window remained where he left it. No one had the heart to move it. The older one came first, unlocking the door with hands that trembled. The sound of the lock turning felt too loud. Inside, the air carried memories. Tea, old paper. Warm meals made without measuring. Nothing felt empty, yet everything did. The younger one arrived later that evening. They stood together in the doorway for a long moment, neither speaking. Words felt too small. They moved through the house slowly, touching things gently. A folded blanket, a cracked cup that had never been thrown away. Notes written in careful handwriting and stuck to the fridge, reminders for a life that had already been lived. Grief did not arrive all at once. It came in waves. Some days were quiet and calm. Others were sharp, unexpected. A sound, a smell. A moment would open everything again. They handled practical matters together. Papers, decisions, conversations they never imagined having so soon. They did it the way he had taught them, calmly, honestly. Without rushing, people from the town came by. Some who remembered, some who barely knew him. They spoke kindly, shared stories, then left. What stayed behind were not the words, but the spaces between them. Weeks passed. The younger one stayed in the house for a while, sleeping in the old room, sitting in the chair by the window in the evenings, just as he used to. "I can hear him sometimes," they said one night. The older one nodded. "Me too." Life did not pause. Work continued. Responsibilities returned. The world expected movement. Slowly, he began sorting through his things, not to erase him, but to understand him. They found old receipts, notes written to himself, lists of small goals. Most were crossed out. A few were not. One note stood. Out it was simple. Keep the door open. Stared at it for a long time. Something shifted. The house did not have to become a memory. Could remain a place for others. The idea grew quietly, not a big plan, not an announcement, just a decision. They spoke about it over several nights. "What if we helped one person at a time?" the younger one suggested. He did," the older replied. "They started small, eh? Neighbor's child who needed help with school? Quiet teenager who needed a safe place. To sit and talk, they offered meals, listening, time. Nothing formal, just presence. The house slowly filled. Again, not with noise, but with purpose. The older one repaired what had been broken for years. The younger one cleaned and organized, turning the space into something welcoming without changing its soul. On the wall, they kept the old drawings. No one questioned it. Those who came understood. Stories spread. Quietly, not about the man, but about the house. People began calling it a safe place. No sign was put up. No name was given. It did not need one. One evening, a young person sat at the table, hands shaking. "No one ever stayed," they whispered. The older one leaned forward. "Someone stayed for us," they said. "So now we stay for others." The younger one poured tea just the way he used to. Time moved forward. The older one married later in life, not rushing, choosing carefully. The younger one found balance between work and purpose. The house remained shared. Grandchildren came through its doors. Some stayed for an hour, some for longer, all left knowing they mattered. Years passed. The pain softened, the love did not. On quiet evenings, they still sat together, sometimes speaking, sometimes not. "I wish he could see this," the younger one said once. "He can," the older replied. "This is him." The chair by the window stayed. One afternoon, Sunlight hit it just right, and for a moment, it felt like he was still there. The story did not end with him. It moved forward. Through every open door. Through every person who chose not to look away. That was the legacy. Not wealth, not recognition, just the quiet power of staying. And that was more than enough. The house had learned how to breathe again. Not the way it once did when he was alive, but in a new rhythm shaped by those who came and went. Doors opened more often now. Shoes lined up near the entrance in different sizes. Voices filled the rooms, some loud, some careful. All carrying pieces of stories still being written. The older one and the younger one never called what they were doing a mission. They never wrote plans or rules. They simply remembered what it felt like to be unseen, and they refused to let that feeling live inside. These walls, some days were easy, others were not. There were moments when the weight of it all pressed down hard, when helping others reopened wounds they thought had healed. On those days, they sat together at the table, late at night, cups of tea growing cold between them. "We don't have to save everyone," younger one said once, voice tired. "I know," the older replied. "We just have to stay honest." That had been his way too. Honesty over perfection, presence over promises. The house became known in quiet ways. No flyers, no social media posts. Just word passed carefully between people who needed it. A young person who had nowhere to sell. Study. A sibling trying to hold a family together. Someone who needed silence more than advice. They were welcomed the same way the children once had been. Without questions, without judgment. With food on the table and space to breathe. The chair by the window stayed where it was. No one sat in it often. When they did, it was usually after a long day. When the light fell just right, and the room felt still, sometimes the younger one caught themselves speaking toward it without realizing, "I think you'd like them," they whispered once after a difficult conversation with a teenager who reminded them too much of themselves. Life outside the house kept moving. Jobs changed. Relationships grew and stretched. Children were born. The older one became a parent in a quiet, steady way. There were no big announcements. Just a small room prepared with care and long nights filled with learning. When the baby cried, the older one remembered how he used to walk the floor slowly. Humming off-key, that habit returned. The younger one became a familiar figure in the house now too, not just as a helper but as an anchor. Someone people trusted, someone who knew when to speak and when to simply sit. One afternoon, a young person asked, "Why do you do this?" The younger one thought for a moment. "Because someone did it for us," they answered. "Who?" "A man who didn't think he was special," they said. "But he was," the young person nodded. "Not fully understanding yet. Understanding would come later." There were setbacks, a misunderstanding that caused hurt, a person who took advantage and left behind damage. Moments when doubt crept in. Are we doing enough? Are we doing too much? On those days, the older one returned to the note found years ago. Keep the door open, not wide, not without care, just open. That balance mattered. Years passed, and the house began to feel like a bridge, not a destination. A crossing. People came burdened and left lighter. Some stayed in touch, some disappeared into better lives. That was the hope. One evening, after everyone had gone home, the older and younger one sat together in the quiet. "Do you ever think about what our lives would have been like without him?" the younger one asked. The older one nodded slowly. "I try not to," they said. "Not because it doesn't matter, but because this is what came from it." Rain began to fall. The sound carried memory. The first rainy day. The broken steps. Two children sitting silently, one man choosing to stop. The younger one closed their eyes. That day changed everything, they said. Yes, the older replied. And it keeps changing things. They sat without speaking for a long time. Inside the house, someone slept peacefully in the next room. Unaware of how many lives had shaped the space around them, that was how it worked. Love passed quietly. One decision at a time, no spotlight, no applause, just people choosing not to turn away as the night deepened. The older one stood and adjusted the blanket on the couch, the same way he once had, somewhere between memory and now. The man remained not as a shadow, not as a ghost, but as a way of living, and that way lived on, in the house. In the house, in the people, in every open door yet to come, the house no longer belonged to one story. It carried many now. Some were loud and unfinished. Others were quiet and complete. The walls held laughter from people who had passed through, arguments that ended in understanding, and silences that healed instead of hurting. The older one noticed something one morning while standing at the window. The street looked the same, but the feeling had changed. People walked slower here. They greeted each other more often. Children played without fear near the steps where two ignored kids once sat. It was not magic. It was repetition, care. Given again and again had softened the space. The younger one returned that afternoon with news. A small group from another area had asked for help. They wanted advice on how to create something similar. Not a shelter. Not a center. Just a safe place. We're not experts, the younger one said carefully. The older one smiled. Neither was he. They agreed to meet, not to lead, just to share. The meeting was simple. Chairs in a circle. Tea passed around. Stories exchanged. They spoke honestly. About mistakes, about limits, about how love did not fix everything. But it made things bearable. One person asked, "How do you keep going when it hurts?" The older one answered slowly. He lived in a small rented house at the edge of town. The kind of place people passed every day without ever wondering who stayed inside. The paint on the walls was faded. The gate made a soft sound when it opened, and the lights were usually off early at night. He was not poor, but he was careful. He had learned long ago how to live with less and ask for nothing. Every morning he woke up before the sun. He made his own tea, packed a simple lunch, and left for work without speaking to anyone. At work, he did what was required and nothing more. He was reliable, quiet, and easy to ignore. His coworkers knew him as the man who never complained and never shared personal stories. When others talked about families, weddings, or plans for the future, he listened politely and stayed silent. There was a time when his life had been louder. Years earlier, he had dreams, close relationships, and plans that felt solid. But loss had a way of emptying rooms without making noise. One by one, the people who mattered most had left his life, some by choice, some by fate. After that, he learned how to keep his world small. Smaller worlds hurt less when something breaks. In the evenings, he walked home the same route every day. The road passed a row of old buildings, a small shop, and a narrow open space where children sometimes played. Most days he kept his eyes down, thinking about nothing in particular. But one evening, something unusual caught his attention. Two children were sitting near the broken steps of an old building. They were not playing. They were not talking. I sat with knees pulled close to the chest, staring at the ground. The other leaned against the wall, watching people pass as if waiting for someone who never came. They looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep at first. He walked past them. He told himself it was none of his business. Children were often left outside. Maybe their parents were nearby. Maybe this was normal for them. He had no reason to stop. He had stopped getting involved in other people's problems a long time ago. But the image stayed with him. That night, while eating his dinner alone, he kept thinking about the way the younger one held their hands together, as if afraid they might be taken away. He remembered that feeling too well. The feeling of being unsure if anyone would notice if you disappeared. The next day, he passed the same spot. The children were there again. Same place. Same silence. Same empty look in their eyes. He slowed his steps. People walked past them without looking. Some glanced for a second and then turned away. A few shook their heads, not in concern, but in quiet judgment. The children had already been placed into a box in everyone's mind. A box labeled "Not My Problem." He stood across the street for a moment, unsure what to do. His heart told him to walk over. His mind told him to keep moving. He was not trained for this. He was not rich. He had no answers to offer. He didn't even know their names. Finally, he did something small. He went to the nearby shop and bought 2 packets of bread and some fruit. Nothing special, just enough to share. When he approached them, they stiffened. Their bodies reacted before their faces did. The older one stepped slightly in front of the younger, protective, cautious. "I'm not here to bother you," he said softly. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. He hadn't spoken this gently in years. He placed the food on the step between them and took a step back. "You can eat it if you want," he added. "If not, that's okay too." He didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked away. All the way home, his chest felt tight. He kept wondering if he had done the wrong thing. Maybe he had embarrassed them. Maybe he had crossed a line. Kindness could feel risky when you weren't used to it. The next evening, he saw them again. This time, the food wrappers were gone. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply nodded once as he passed. The older child nodded back. That was all. Days passed. The small exchange became a quiet routine. He would bring something simple. He would leave it without asking questions. The children would accept it without saying thank you. No one spoke about where they came from or why they were alone. Trust grew slowly, like a plant pushing through hard ground. He began to notice details. The way the younger one always waited to eat until the older one took the first bite. The way both of them stayed alert even while resting, as if danger could appear at any moment. These were not habits learned from comfort. One evening, rain started suddenly. Heavy drops fell, turning dust into mud. People rushed past, covering their heads. The children were still sitting there, soaked in unmoving. He stopped. Without thinking too much, he said, "You can wait under my roof until the rain stops." The words surprised him as much as they surprised them. They hesitated. Fear and hope crossed their faces at the same time. The older one looked around, searching for someone else, some rule, some reason to say no. "I live close," he added. "You don't have to stay long." After a long moment, they stood up. They followed him at a careful distance, ready to run if needed. When they reached his house, he opened the door and stepped aside, giving them space to decide. Inside, nothing was fancy. A small sitting area, a clean floor, a kitchen with only the basics. But it was dry. It was quiet. It was safe. They stood near the door, unsure where to put their feet. "You can sit," he said, pointing to the chairs. They sat, stiff and silent. He made tea, then remembered they might prefer something else. He poured water and placed biscuits on the table. "You don't have to talk," he said. "You don't owe me anything." The rain slowed, then stopped. When they left, they did not say goodbye. But the next day they came back. That was how it began. Not with paperwork. Not with promises. Just with a door left open and a man who chose not to look away. He did not know then that his life was already changing. He only knew that the house felt less empty than before. That night, after they left, he sat alone and listened to the silence. It felt different now. Less heavy. Less sharp. For the first time in years, he did not feel completely invisible. And somewhere in the town, 2 children slept, knowing that at least one person had noticed. None of them understood yet how deeply their lives were about to become connected. The next few weeks followed a pattern that none of them talked about, but all of them felt. The children began appearing earlier in the day. Sometimes they waited near the old building. Other times they sat closer to his street, as if testing how near they were allowed to be. He never asked why. He understood that questions could feel like pressure. He kept doing small things. A warm meal in the evening, clean water, a place to sit. Sometimes he let them watch television, though the sound stayed low. He noticed how their eyes followed every movement in the house, how they memorized where things were kept. This was not curiosity. It was survival. At night, after they left, he often replayed the day in his mind. He worried about boundaries, about responsibility, about whether kindness could turn into something he could not manage. But every time he thought about stepping back, he remembered their faces on that first rainy evening. He remembered how close he had come to walking away. The children rarely spoke at first. When they did, their voices were quiet, careful. Short answers. No stories. No complaints. The older one clearly felt responsible for the younger, always watching, always ready. The younger followed closely, copying every move. One evening while he washed dishes, he heard a soft sound behind him. When he turned, he saw the younger one holding a broken cup from the shelf. It had slipped and cracked. "I'm sorry," the child whispered, eyes wide with fear. He looked at the cup, then at the child. "It's okay," he said simply. "It was old anyway." The child didn't move. "You're not in trouble," he added. Something changed then. Not suddenly. Not fully. But enough. The next time they came, the children stayed longer. They began to relax their shoulders. They asked small questions. What time he woke up. Why he always drank tea instead of coffee. What his job was like. He answered honestly, but simply. He did not tell them everything. He did not tell them about the nights he once spent staring at walls, wondering how life had shrunk so much. Children did not need that weight. Outside his house, people began to notice. A neighbor once stopped him and asked, "Those kids, are they yours?" He hesitated. "I'm just helping," he replied. The neighbor nodded, but the look on their face was not kind. It was doubtful, careful, as if kindness needed permission. Whispers followed. Some said he was foolish. Some said he was inviting trouble. Others said nothing at all, which somehow felt worse. He pretended not to hear. Inside the house, the children slowly began to change. They laughed once, surprised by the sound themselves. The younger one slept on the couch one evening without meaning to. When the child woke up in fear, expecting anger, he simply handed over a blanket. "Rest," he said. "It's late." That night, they stayed. He sat awake longer than usual, listening to the quiet breathing in the other room. He felt something close to fear, not of the children, but of attachment. He knew how painful it could be to lose what you allowed yourself to love. The next morning, he made breakfast for 3 without saying why. As days turned into months, the unspoken truth became clear. The children had nowhere else to go. No one was looking for them. No one came knocking on his door asking questions. The absence of concern from the world around them was loud. He began handling small responsibilities. Helping them wash clothes? Making sure they bathed. Walking them to a nearby school and asking careful questions without revealing too much. The process was slow. Official systems were complicated. He learned patience in ways he never expected. There were difficult days. The older one sometimes grew angry for no clear reason. Doors were slammed. Silence stretched for hours. Once harsh words were spoken, words shaped by past pain rather than present reality. He did not raise his voice. "I'm still here," said during one of those moments. Even if you're angry, that confused them more than punishment ever could. Money became tighter. He skipped meals without mentioning it. He worked extra hours when possible. His body felt older than before, but he ignored the ache. There were things more important now than comfort. One evening, he overheard the children whispering to each other. "He's going to send us away," the younger one said, the words cut. Deeper than he expected, he sat with them that night. "Don't know what the future looks like," he said carefully. "But I won't send you away just because things are hard." They listened without interrupting. Trust was no longer fragile, but it was still new. Around this time, he realized how much they were teaching him too. How to be patient. How to listen without fixing everything. How to care again without drowning in fear. He began smiling more. Sleeping better. The house felt lived in now. Messy sometimes, loud sometimes, alive. The town still watched from a distance. Some approval came slowly. A teacher offered help without asking questions. A shop owner slipped extra food into his bag. These gestures were small, but they mattered. One afternoon, while walking home together, the younger one reached for his hand without thinking. The touch was brief, almost accidental, but it stayed with him long after that night. He sat alone and realized something important. This was no longer temporary. He did not know how long he could protect them. He did not know how life would unfold. But he knew one thing clearly. They were no longer invisible, and neither was he. By the time the third year arrived, life inside the small house no longer felt temporary. The children no longer asked if they could sit down or drink water. They moved around the space like it belonged to them, though always with care. Shoes were placed neatly near the door. Cups were washed without being told. These small habits said more than words ever could. The man noticed changes in himself too. He woke up earlier, not because he had to, but because mornings mattered now. There were lunches to pack, uniforms to check, shoes to find. His quiet life had filled with movement, and instead of feeling tired, he felt useful. School became a turning point. The older one struggled at first. Sitting still was hard. Trusting adults was harder. Teachers complained about silence one day and anger the next. Meetings were called. Questions were asked. Do they have family? One teacher asked carefully. He paused before answering. They have me, said. The words surprised him, but they felt right. The younger one adapted faster. There was curiosity in every lesson, a hunger to learn that felt almost urgent. Books became treasures. Every new word was practiced again and again at home, sometimes late into the night. He helped when he could. When he couldn't, he learned alongside them. Many nights ended with all three sitting on the floor, papers spread around, learning together. Money remained a quiet worry. Bills arrived regularly, without caring about effort or good intentions. Some nights he sat at the table after everyone slept, counting numbers over and over, hoping they would change. He never spoke about it. The children sensed it anyway. One afternoon, the older one handed him a folded paper. It was a list, written carefully. Simple chores, helping neighbors, small jobs that could earn a little money. I can help, the child said. Eyes steady. He looked at the paper for a long time. We'll manage, he replied. But thank you. That night, he cried quietly for the first time in years, not from sadness, but from something closer to gratitude. The past still visited sometimes. There were days when loud noises caused sudden fear, days when the children pulled away without warning, nights when nightmares filled the house with silent tension. He learned to respond with patience instead of questions. A glass of water placed nearby, a light left on, a calm presence that said, without speaking, we're safe now. The town slowly changed its view. The same people who once looked away now nodded politely. Some smiled. A few even offered help, though awkwardly, not sure how to step into a story they had ignored for so long. He did not hold resentment. He understood how easy it was to look away. He had done it himself once. As time passed, official matters could no longer be avoided. Papers had to be signed. Meetings had to be attended. Decisions had to be made. The process was exhausting. Offices were crowded. Rules were confusing. Many forms asked questions that had no simple answers. He answered honestly. He did not paint himself as a hero. He did not describe the children as helpless. He told the truth, that they found each other when all of them needed someone. When the final approval came, it was quiet. No celebration. No announcement, just a stamp on a paper, but that night he made a better dinner than usual. The children noticed. What's the occasion? The younger one asked. Just a good day, he replied. They smiled, not fully understanding, but feeling it anyway. Years passed faster after that. The children grew taller. Voices changed. Opinions became stronger. Doors were slammed again, but this time followed by apologies. Arguments ended with conversations instead of silence. He learned when to guide and when to step back. The older one found comfort in working with hands, fixing things, building small projects in the backyard. There was pride in seeing something broken become useful again. The younger one found comfort in words, writing stories, asking questions about the world. Dreaming loudly, he supported both without comparison. One evening, while sitting together, the older one spoke without looking up. "Why did you help us?" He thought carefully. "Because someone should have," he said. That answer was enough. As the children entered their teenage years, new challenges arrived. Peer pressure, doubt, the heavy feeling of trying to belong in a world that once rejected you. There were mistakes. Some small, some serious. He handled them with firmness and fairness. "I won't give up on you," he said more than once. "But I won't pretend everything is fine either." That balance mattered. The house continued to change. Walls filled with drawings and notes. Laughter mixed with frustration. Life felt full, sometimes overwhelming, but never empty. Late one night, after a long day, he sat alone in the same chair where he once counted bills and worried about the future. He realized something important. He was no longer afraid of loss. Not because it couldn't happen, but because he had learned that love was worth the risk. Down the hallway, 2 doors were closed. Behind them, lives shaped by care instead of neglect. He turned off the light with a quiet sense of peace. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Life rarely warns before it changes direction. One ordinary morning, while the house was still quiet, the man felt a sharp pain that stopped him mid-step. He held the edge of the table until the room settled again. He told himself it was nothing. Age came with small pains. That was normal, but the pain returned. He began hiding it the way he had hidden worries for years. He smiled through discomfort. He rested only when no one was watching. He did not want to become a burden. After all this time spent protecting the children, he did not know how to let himself be protected. The children noticed anyway. "You're slower," the older one said one evening. Not accusing, just observant. "I'm fine," he replied quickly. The younger one watched him closely after that. Plates were cleared before he reached for them. Heavy things were moved without being asked. Their care was quiet but steady. Then came the day he could not hide it. At work, the pain became unbearable. The room spun. Voices blurred. When he opened his eyes again, he was on the floor. Surrounded by worried faces, the hospital smelled of disinfectant and fear. Doctors spoke calmly, but their words landed heavily. Tests, monitoring, rest, long-term care. Nothing life-ending, but nothing small either. He nodded through it all, pretending strength he no longer had. When the children arrived, their faces were pale. "You didn't tell us," the older one said. "I didn't want you to worry," he answered. "That's not fair," the younger one whispered. They sat beside his bed, refusing to leave. In that moment, he saw how much they had grown. Not just in height, but in courage. Recovery was slow. Returning home felt different. The house he once managed alone now demanded more than he could give. Simple tasks became difficult. Pride became an obstacle. Money followed health into uncertainty. Work hours were reduced. Bills piled up. Savings thinned. He spent nights awake, staring at the ceiling, planning how to protect them if he failed. One evening, he overheard them talking in the kitchen. "We can help," the older one said firmly. "He won't accept it easily," the younger replied. They were right when they approached him. He resisted. "You should focus on your own future," he insisted. "This is our future," the older one said. The words silenced him. Slowly, the balance shifted. The older one took on part-time work. Hands that once fixed broken tools now earned honest money. The younger one managed school and small responsibilities at home with determination beyond there. Years he watched them step forward, both proud and afraid. There were moments when frustration boiled over. I'm not useless, he snapped once, ashamed immediately. We know, the younger one said gently. But you don't have to do everything alone. That night he apologized. It was harder than any physical pain. Outside help came unexpectedly. A neighbor arranged meals for a week. A teacher checked in. Even the shop owner extended credit without asking. The town that once ignored them now stood, quietly beside them. Still, the hardest battle was inside him. He had built his identity on being strong for others. Weakness felt like failure. One afternoon, while sitting together, the older one spoke. You taught us how to stand up again, the child said. Let us do the same. Tears filled his eyes before he could stop them. He realized then that care was not a one-way path. As months passed, routines adjusted. Healing continued. Slowly, carefully, he learned to rest without guilt. Laughter returned. Softer, but real. The children grew more independent, confident, grounded. Late one evening, as he listened to their voices from the other room, he understood something that frightened and comforted him at the same time. They no longer needed him in the same way, and that meant he had done his job well. Still, fear lingered. What if his health worsened? What if he became dependent? He kept these thoughts to himself. For now, they were together, and together had always been enough. Time did not slow down, but it became gentler. The man's health improved enough for him to move without fear again, though he never returned to who he had been before. He learned to listen to his body. He learned to pause. The children, now grown enough to notice the weight of choices, learned to plan ahead. The older one finished school and moved into steady work. The hands that once fixed broken chairs now handled real responsibility. There was pride in earning, not just money, but trust. The younger one stayed close to books and learning, dreaming out loud about a future that once felt impossible. They talked often in the evenings. Not long speeches, just honest words, about fears, about plans, about how strange it felt to belong somewhere. One night the power went out. The house fell into darkness. They sat together with a small lamp between them, shadows moving across the walls. Do you ever regret it? The younger one asked quietly. He understood what was being asked. No, he said without hesitation. Not for a single day. There were moments when the past tried to return. Old worries. Old habits of silence. But they faced them together now. Then came another test. A letter arrived with official markings. It spoke of reviews, changes, and paperwork that could affect their living situation. Nothing was decided yet, but the uncertainty stirred old fears. He read the letter twice. Handshaking, the children watched him closely. We'll handle it, the older one said. And if it doesn't work out, the younger added, we'll still be a family. The words settled into the room like a promise. Meetings followed. Questions were asked again. The same story retold. This time, he did not speak alone. The children spoke too. They spoke about nights that felt safe. About being seen. About how one quiet man had changed the direction of their lives without ever asking for thanks. The decision came. Weeks later, they could stay. Nothing dramatic followed. No cheering. Just deep relief. That evening, they cooked together. The food burned slightly. They laughed anyway. Years continued to pass. The older one moved out eventually, not far, but far enough to grow. Visits were frequent. Advice was exchanged both ways now. The younger one pursued studies with determination, often calling home with updates and questions. The house grew quieter again at first. The silence scared him. Then he understood. This silence was different. It was full, not empty. One afternoon, while sitting outside, he felt the familiar ache in his chest. He closed his eyes, breathing slowly. Before he could reach for his phone, footsteps approached. The older one had come by unannounced. You okay? I will be, he said honestly. They sat together until the feeling passed. Later that week, the younger one arrived too. Bringing food and stories, the pattern became clear. When he was strong, he guided. When he was weak, they stood beside him. The lifeline had quietly changed direction. on a calm evening. Years after the rainy day that started it all, they sat together one last time in the same small house. "I never planned any of this," he admitted. "That's why it matters?" "The older one," said the younger one, smiled. "You chose us." He looked at them both. They were no longer children. They were proof. Proof that kindness did not disappear when ignored. Proof that quiet lives could leave loud impacts. As night settled, he felt something close to peace. He had taken in 2 children everyone ignored, and in return, they had given him a reason to keep living. Even when life tried to take everything away, that was the truth he carried with him. Not a story of rescue, but a story of finding each other. And that, he knew, would always be enough. Life did not end neatly after everything settled. It never did. It simply kept moving, sometimes softly, sometimes without warning. The man grew older in ways he could feel and ways he could not see. His steps were slower, his mornings quieter, but his heart was fuller than it had ever been. The house changed again. It was no longer the center of busy days and loud evenings. It became a place of return. A place where doors opened without knocking, and food appeared without asking. The walls still held old drawings and notes, though some had faded with time. He never removed them. They reminded him that love leaves marks long after people grow up. The older one visited every week, sometimes more. Work was demanding, but priorities were clear. When money improved, help came without being offered loudly. Bills were paid quietly. Repairs were done without discussion. Pride was respected. The younger one called often, sometimes just to talk about nothing. Studies brought stress, excitement, and moments of doubt. The man listened more than he spoke. "You don't always need answers," he said once. "Sometimes you just need someone to hear you." That lesson stayed. One winter, the cold felt harsher than usual. His body resisted more than before. Simple tasks drained him. He avoided hospitals, not out of fear, but habit. Still, there were days when even stubbornness could not help. One morning, he did not get out of bed. The phone rang unanswered. By the time help arrived, the sun was already high. Recovery took longer this time. The children, no longer children, rearranged their lives without hesitation. Shifts were changed. Classes were delayed. The roles shifted again, naturally, without words. In the hospital room, silence felt heavy. "I don't want to be a burden," he said weakly. "You were never a burden," the older one replied. "You were a beginning." Those words stayed with him. Back home, adjustments were made. Safety rails, easier routines, accepting limits. The hardest part was letting go of control. Some days, frustration surfaced. "I used to do this myself," he muttered once, "and you still would." "If you could," the younger one said gently. "That hasn't changed." Slowly, he learned that dignity did not disappear with dependence. Outside, life continued. The town grew. New faces replaced old ones. Few remembered the 2 ignored children or the quiet man who took them in. That was fine. Stories did not need witnesses to be real. One afternoon, a young neighbor knocked on the door. "I heard you helped raise 2 kids, the person said nervously. "I'm struggling with my niece. I don't know what I'm doing." He smiled softly. "None of us ever do," he replied. "But showing up matters more than getting it right." Advice was shared, not instructions, just honesty. Years later, the younger one finished studies and began working. Independence came with confidence. Visits continued, though time felt shorter now. Life moved faster. One evening, the house filled again. Laughter echoed. Old stories were retold. "You remember when the power went out and we burned dinner?" The younger one laughed. "I remember eating it anyway," the older one replied. He watched them from his chair. Heart full. This was what he had hoped for. Not gratitude, not praise, but connection that lasted. Later that night, when the house grew quiet again, he sat alone and thought about the first rainy day. About how close he had come to walking away. That choice had shaped everything. Another winter arrived. This one was harder. Breathing became difficult. Nights stretched long. Fear visited quietly. He did not tell them at first. They noticed anyway. Medical visits increased. Conversations became careful. One afternoon, sitting together, the older one asked the question no one wanted to ask. "Are you scared?" He thought for a moment. "I used to be," he said. "Not anymore." They understood what he meant. Arrangements were discussed. Wishes were shared. Nothing rushed. Nothing dramatic, just honesty. "I don't need much," he said. "Just keep showing up for each other." Promises were made, not loudly, but firmly. The final months were slow. Some days were good. Others were not. But he was never alone. Hands held his. Voices filled the room. Familiar faces came and went. He smiled often one evening as the sun set softly through the window. He spoke quietly. "I never planned to be anyone's lifeline," he said. "I just didn't want you to feel invisible." The younger one wiped tears. "You saved us," they whispered. "No," he replied gently. "We saved each other when the time came." It was peaceful, no fear, only warmth, only love. Afterward, the house stood still. Grief filled the rooms. But so did gratitude. The children returned often, sitting in silence. Remembering life did not end. It continued. Years later, both of them carried the story forward. They helped others, not loudly, not for attention. You remember why you started, and you forgive yourself when you need rest. That answer traveled farther than expected. Months later, another house opened, then another. None were connected by name, only by choice. The younger one watched this quietly, often overwhelmed. He would never believe this. They said one evening. The older one shook their head. He would. He always believed small things mattered. Life brought new challenges too. The older one's child grew older, asking hard questions. Why does everyone come here? The answer was simple. Because everyone needs somewhere safe sometimes. The child accepted this without struggle. That felt normal. That was the point. The younger one faced their own turning point. An opportunity to move far away. Better work. A new life. They sat together late into the night, weighing the decision. "I don't want to abandon this," the younger one said. "You're not abandoning anything," the older replied. "You're carrying it." The younger one left months later. The house did not close. Others stepped in. That was always the goal, too. Build something that did not depend on one person. Years passed. The house aged. So did they. Repairs were made, paint faded, but the door remained open. One rainy afternoon, a young person sat on the steps outside, silent. Still, the older one noticed immediately. They remembered another rainy day long ago. Instead of rushing, they did something familiar. They brought food. They placed it nearby. They stepped back. The young person looked up, confused. "You don't have to talk," the older one said gently. "But you don't have to stay alone either." Something shifted. History did not repeat. It continued. That night, the older one sat alone in the chair by the window. The same chair. The same view. They thought about the man who once sat there, counting bills and worrying quietly. They understood him better. Now, not as a savior, but as someone brave enough to care. The younger one called from far away. "It's still going, isn't it?" They asked. "Yes," the older replied. "It always will." As the years stretched on, stories spread, not as legends, but as habits. If someone was hurting, you showed up. If you had space, you shared it. If you were tired, you rested without shame. That was the lesson passed down. One evening, long after the house lights were turned off, the older one stood at the door before locking it. They paused, then left it unlocked, just in case. Somewhere, someone needed it, and that was enough. The man who once took in 2 ignored children had not disappeared. He had multiplied in actions, in choices, in quiet courage. The story did not. And it became a way forward.